Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to The Caring View, the only online social care chat show which airs weekly. Currently, we are exclusive to YouTube. Before we get started, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit that bell. There is a tutorial on our Facebook group and on our Twitter. And the views that we express tonight are of our own and nobody else's. Although we're not discussing anything contentious tonight, not discussing anything that's going to get us into deep doo-doo. So we should be okay this evening. Dawn and Mark, how are we? All back together?
Yes,
I'm
not
good,
too bad,
thank you.
How are you?
Not gonna lie, I've just woke up. Honestly, mad dash to the show this evening. Oh, I thought I'm gonna have a cheeky nap, and then that was it. Slept through my alarm, everything. But I'm here. We're good. It's fine. It's freezing. I still don't have my heating on. So yes. What's new in the news this week? Anything we should be talking about? One doesn't really want to discuss COVID, but Omicron. Is it going to prevent Christmas? What's the word on the street in social care? How are care homes having to prepare for it? Dawn, I know you're out and about on the front line at the moment. So is there anything you're picking up with what's going on?
I think the general consensus in some of the services that I've been in is they are preparing for a lockdown. So a lot of the care services that I've been speaking to over the last 3 to 4 days are creating policies and procedures in preparation for another lockdown and locking down to families if necessary, going back to pods, going back to partitions. So, I think the general consensus is if they prepare for it now and get everything in place, then it's not going to come as a great shock when if the Prime Minister announces a lockdown, it's not going to come to a great shock to the residents, families and the staff. So there's lots of preparations going on behind the scenes.
Mark, a lockdown, preparing to cancel visits again. Is it the route we should be taking, or should we have learned from last year by now and actually let's not cancel visits, let's continue moving forwards, but we've learned our lesson? What do you reckon?
I think, like Dawn said, care homes are already doing it. They seem to have just jumped the gun, but I don't know. There's been nothing. The care minister's been all over, the radio doing kind of interviews and bits and pieces, but there's been no talk about social care and the new variant. And there's obviously no kind of sign of any guidance, which doesn't surprise me. But I think homes should just be carrying on as normal. There's 14 cases, 9 of them are in Scotland, I think it is. So there's hardly any cases anyway. And I don't know, you look at the data in South Africa and it seems to be less of a risk than the Delta variant. So I don't know whether we're all just media hyped up or not. But
I must admit, I did read an article the other day with it, because it's got something like 10 open strains or something, so that makes it like more infectious or something. But there's a number of scientists that think it might actually be an evolutionary dead end of the virus because it is so open, so it's just going to burn out quicker than other variants have done. I mean, do we need to discuss how this might affect the mandate of the vaccine? So currently, as far as I'm aware, boosters aren't affected or aren't included in the policy mandate, but with Pfizer saying they're possibly going to have to go back to the drawing board and bring something more effective, are we expecting to see boosters as part of this mandate moving forwards?
I think so. I definitely think it's going to happen. I think by Christmas there will be another consultation and they will look to mandate the boosters in social care, probably in line with the NHS come Easter. So Carla's just commented actually and said that Dr. Jenny Harries has said that people in care homes shouldn't socialise or in care services. So I think there's different information going to services than there is into the wider scope, for example, in social media. So, I think the information we're getting is not to open the doors as much, but there was only new guidance released on Friday. So it kind of contradicts what we read in one place to the next. But I definitely think the boosters will be mandated. And I also think the flu jab will be mandated next year as well.
I think the booster will follow. I think what's strange is that all the manufacturers of the vaccine have all said they need to tweak the booster. So if you're having a booster now, it's almost like, I reckon, in a few weeks' time, once they've manufactured it. I think Pfizer have said it's going to take a year. Then you're going to have another one as well. But who knows?
some good points raised there, and I will just say for providers out there and companies out there, social care or not, the last sort of 18 months have been horrendous. So the first thing we want to do now is party and have a good time at Christmas. But please, 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 just remember that if you and your entire team go out and you all get COVID, watch your contingency plans. So let's think of alternatives at Christmas this year, just to try and postpone any other drastic incidences that might be occurring. The only other thing I will add is Omicron came, and I don't know whether I'm pronouncing that right. I know it's a Greek alphabet letter, so I apologise if I'm being insensitive in how I try and say that. It reminds me of a transformer, if I'm honest. It's like, Omicron. Or it's from Futurama, isn't it? The Omicron's from Futurama. But it has come at an ideal time, because we were led to believe there was a white paper coming on Monday just past. And it hasn't come, surprisingly. So I think there's a bit of a delay here. How convenient. Yeah. So I don't know whether we're going to get it for Christmas this year or whether it's going to be a New Year surprise. What do we think?
I did see on Twitter, there's a lot of people saying it's coming tomorrow morning. So you never know.
Well, that'll be good. We need it,
Yeah. No,
just track record with the government.
I had heard it was supposed to be by the end of this month, so I've been constantly refreshing all day, thinking it'll come today. They'll do it today. Leave it till the very last minute, and there was nothing. So hopefully, we do need it. So hopefully, it will bounce in everybody's inboxes tomorrow.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I don't think there's anything really other major news to be discussing this week. So should we get into tonight's discussion?
Yes, we can do. Yes.
Mark, who have we got with us?
So tonight we have got Sonia Ray, who, if you watch this show on a regular basis, you'll recognise.
She's like the fourth presenter now.
Nectar HR. And we've also got Dudley, who's joining us as well. He's done a lot of talks on equality and diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So it's great to have you both. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Sorry, Sonia.
I'm good. It's nice to be back on the show. I'm waiting for my gold medal in the post. I want a real gold medal.
And you're not talking about COVID, which is really exciting.
That's another great thing, yeah. And it's so nice to be on with Dudley as well, because I know Dudley and we have some very great, interesting discussions. So it's really nice to be on tonight with Dudley as well.
No, thank you, Sonia. I mean, it's nice to be on with you as well. I think we seem to have been on various panels together and various events, so and really complementing each other as well with both the space we're in as well. So that's really good as well to know.
Great.
So yeah, you've both done quite a lot of talks, and obviously you were both at the CARE show talking about equality and diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So who wants to kick it off tonight?
I'm going to let Dudley go first.
Okay. Dudley.
Thank you very much. It's an honour. Now, listen, I think when we think of the inclusion, I think for me it's interesting. So, I mean, at the moment, I'd say my background and what I'm doing at the moment is providing a fusion of care, diversity and inclusion services. And what I found is during a project that I started at the beginning of the year, it was really a Keeping Well project to help the workforce just to keep well, their well-being with all what was happening during the pandemic. And it was really stressed out. But it's in Southeast London where there was about 67% of the workforce were multi-ethnic workforce. And when we looked at the actual portal of the Keeping Well portal, there was nothing which they could feel that really looked like them, felt like them. They fairly felt alienated. And there was a big issue about not many people from the multi-ethnic sort of workforce really interacting with the website. And so I was actually tasked to actually pull it down and really put something together which they felt that they could come to feel welcome, their culture was represented and they really felt welcome. And it was really something that was really unique and something I'm really proud of, and it's grown from strength to strength. And I think when I looked on the bigger page, if we look about various things that happened during the pandemic, we know with George Floyd and various other elements, and there was this big issue about just diversity, which has really been massive. And for me, it's about, if we think about sort of like social care, you know, we're one of the largest sort of employers of a diverse workforce in the country. And, you know, we look at the protected characteristics for those of the people we care for. But then the biggest issue was, what about the workforce? Are we really having a seat at the table? Are we really being asked questions? Are we really included? And we have rights as well. And I think this is really one of the things I started to look at, and how workplaces would just have a strategy in place where they could actually put something in where everyone could have a seat at the table. You know, there is someone that said to me, you know, we don't have a seat at the table. And so the answer is now we have to bring our own chair, which I think a lot of people in social care are doing right now. And we've got some great people on this panel, or should we say here in the caring view. And I think a lot of the time you'd sit in meetings, you wouldn't be invited to meetings, but now I think we're ever present. Some of us here on TV now, national television, some of us at various speaking events, meeting with commissioners, and I think it's really good that actually having a voice and being included is key, but also being represented. And I'm sure we all remember when it was Clap for Carers, and one of the things that people were bugged about were that there was this big NHS sign, and you know, and everyone was saying, "Oh, well done to the NHS staff in the front line. They've really saved everyone." And they were looking, and we were thinking in social care, you know, we have more of a larger workforce than those in NHS, for those who don't know, and yet, you know, we weren't really being considered. Eventually, we were included. So I think being excluded, no one likes, and I think that was one of the key factors of really allowing me to really put together sort of 5 plans or strategy to really help those in small workforces to larger workforces. And I think that's one of the sort of important areas I think now we're looking at. And just to round off, before I sort of tell you about my 5 sort of point sort of plan and strategy, it's really that if, you know, an inclusive workforce is a productive workforce, because everyone can have a seat at the table, everyone can bring their own bits and pieces to help and to develop that. And I think you mentioned that we're talking about vaccines at the beginning of the show. I'm surprised you never mentioned sort of like retention and recruitment, and shortage of staff, which is probably the other sort of side of things, which I'm sure most of you are hearing sort of sad stories of, you know, people needing care workers, you know, managers running away, deputy managers. And so a more inclusive workforce means that, you know, the likelihood that the workforce, people are going to stay in the workforce. And so it's great for retention as well. So I think that's another sort of thing we should think about when we think about having an inclusive workforce where everyone sort of can come to the table and feel that they belong and be valued.
Yeah. I think before we get into your 5 points, because I mean, you know, spoilers, we know what they are, and they are absolutely fantastic. I think you do bring up some really, really interesting points. I mean, you know, the study from the workforce between 2020 and 2021, 82% of the workforce was female, 18% was male. And yet the males still hold the majority of leadership roles and leadership positions. You know, 21% of the workforce were Black, Asian and minority ethnic people. Probably one of the most diverse workforces that we've currently got in the country. And yet they still aren't holding those positions of power and those positions of meaning. So how can we as employers, how can we as a sector open up those avenues of opportunity? Is it a case for people to step back and go, actually, I need to let someone else have a chance now? Or is there something we can do internally, organizationally, to actually open up those avenues? And, you know, if only we had a HR expert with us tonight, Sonia.
First of all, what I would say is this is something that is everyone's responsibility. So it doesn't just sit with one person in an organization or one department, it sits with everyone. And I think the thing that we see most, and probably is one of my concerns when it comes to this sector, is we see a lot of generic off-the-shelf stuff happening. So we kind of see it, has anyone got a policy about, you know, equality and diversity, or an equal ops policy? And then it's like, tick, I've got that policy, so I'm fine. But no one's actually taking the time to really look at what that's about and how we work that into our kind of daily life in the workplace. And so what we're seeing is that we're seeing some organizations in other industries that are taking it really seriously, because it's exactly what Dudley said. When you've got a happy, engaged workforce, you have got a highly productive, happy, engaged workforce. You've got higher retention levels. You've got, you know, not many people exiting the business unless it's kind of like natural, you know, retirement and things like that. And you've got career progression, you've got a great organization. But where you are not kind of like putting that in, and you're just using this generic, and you're not really knowing what your processes are, and also how much is impacted by equality, diversity, inclusion, then that's where we start to see concerns, and that's where we start to see these kind of like the figures and the stats showing us that we've got a mainly female workforce, but there's not many in leadership. We've got a lot of Black, Asian minorities, but there's not many at a certain level. And so the first thing I would say is know your own figures as an organization and be really transparent about them. So if you are going to go out there and do this as a project, first of all, know where you stand right now and know what your stats are looking like, and also know why you want to do it. Because a lot of people just kind of want to jump on the bandwagon and go, oh, this, everybody else is doing this, so let's do this. Why do you really want to do it? I mean, from my perspective, it's a statutory, you know, there's employment law, there's the Equality Act, there's so much that can kind of get you into trouble with not doing it. But there's got to be a bit more than that. You've got to want to push it and take it further than that statutory level. Like Dudley's plan is great because it breaks it down. And I guess where we kind of complement each other is I kind of can come in with some other ideas about how it impacts really the whole employee life cycle. So when you're recruiting, you know, what are you thinking about? What kind of training are you offering to staff? You know, we all hold unconscious bias. Nobody has no unconscious bias, but it's about being conscious of your unconscious bias and knowing what our unconscious biases are. But there's not many, I don't see much training happening around that within the social care sector. So like when I speak to managers, they haven't done any kind of equality and diversity training. They don't know about unconscious bias. They don't know about their own biases and potentially how that might impact how they lead and manage in their organizations. And so from our perspective, it really goes down to the absolute foundations of making sure that your processes are right first. And that policy isn't something that you've just downloaded. It's got your stamp on it as an organization, what you want to achieve, what your figures are, and then you can monitor them as you are putting in practices in place. And let's say you followed Dudley's plan, then you need to go back and go, right, what's changed? Have we got to where we were getting to? Do we still need to work on X, Y, and Z, or is there a new area that we now want to concentrate on?
I mean, spot on, absolutely spot on. And I was having this conversation today earlier with a couple of colleagues, and for me, training always needs to be up to date for everybody. I know we don't want to go through repetitive training, but out of all the training we do as an organization, and this is across the board, this doesn't just apply to social care. I personally feel equality and diversity is the one that as soon as you've done it, it's out of date because so much changes and society is evolving so much. And, you know, we now have gender awareness, we now have pronoun awareness, we now have all sorts of things we need to consider. And yet we're at a state in society where, as you mentioned it, and I will say this, you're woke, you're 2PC. And it's a culture that needs to move now for us to be able to advance and to implement this training further and this acceptance further within our settings. So, Dudley, your magical, mystical plan, which is absolutely spot on. What does it entail?
So before I actually start that, I'm really going to bounce off what Sonia was saying, because I think if we use the starting point and in the media, if we look at other sort of sectors or what's been happening, you know, recently within cricket, we saw Azim Rafiq, and it really was really sad to see. Once it was almost like once one person spoke up, it really revealed a lot behind the scenes. And I think the scary thing for me is that, you know, they obviously had covered it up, and when you unravel it, it shows how deep it is. So, you know, we can see the extremities of if you actually don't have this in place. And I guess almost like a parking ticket. If you actually pay early, you don't suffer later on. So I think it's an issue that also mirrors somewhat of society and values of what we're doing. So I think it's almost a way of really helping ourselves. So I mean, that being said, I think for me, I think one of the things that I'm really conscious of is that I think there's lots of people out there putting out policies, plans, what to do, and you can go there and for me, I don't think it's enough. I really think that it's really not just giving people what they can look at, but also the practical steps and guidelines. We all know in social care, one thing that they always say, what does good look like? And really showing people so they are not confused or unaware. So that's one thing that part of my 5-point strategy comes along with. It's about creating that sort of awareness. So that being said, I've sort of started off with my first point. So it goes firstly from the first point is really awareness. And I think believing one can learn from the perspectives of others is important. I think we all know that like a child not knowing what's right and wrong, it starts with being made aware. And a lot of organizations and people aren't sure what's wrong or have a culture where people are able to speak up. So I think the most important thing is awareness and encouraging communication by listening to your workforce so you can become aware, creating a culture by just listening, you can understand what the issues are. And there should be then more of an openness of communication in every organization, because when a person is free to communicate, they're not only communicating, but also sharing their knowledge, which I think is really handy. There was a study that I looked at which said employees with disabilities who disclose most people they interact with are more than twice as likely to feel regularly happy or content at work than employees with disabilities who have not disclosed to anyone. So it shows just on the ground level, just being made aware and being able to communicate, you're able to actually to speak up and feel that you're able to share information as well. The next point after that would be education or educate. Because once you've been made aware, it then helps to educate yourself. And for me, one of the most important things I would say is education is at the core of our development in order to learn. So acknowledging also as well the influences of different cultures on values and behaviors really helps with our cultural intelligence. So someone's heritage or culture is important as well. So my thing that I think that a lot of people get wrong with education is that I can give you a book to read or a course to go on, but not actually understanding the actual cultural awareness or sensitivity of what you're doing gives you a way of how something should be said, or understand why someone has something in the fridge, if they may be of an Islamic faith, they may want to share their food and give an explanation behind it. I think this gives us a better understanding of colleagues, and our conduct can then enrich the lives of people we care for as well, because that as well, if you think about not just only are we just helping our workforce, but also the people we care for. So the next point would be action. Some of the time people have got their certificate, as we know in sort of health and social care, they love a certificate, and they're off, after they've been made aware, and they think, we've done that, it's on our matrix, let's leave it like that. But really the action is really the taking place of what's happening and what to do, and really getting things in place, really having an action plan and putting things into practice. So if someone for a champion goes and learns something, being able to bring it back to the workplace so people can actually take on board and put things in place. One of the things and one of the styles I usually would put out would be, asking someone how they like to their name to be sort of pronounced, or really, if you're not sure, you can ask someone. That is just something that you can do on the most basic level. It doesn't have to be, being shy. There are also various ways of how you can sort of like go about it, but really doing something and really taking action is the key, because if we don't take action, then things obviously, get stale, or they don't happen and people forget. So really putting that education into plan is key. So action, I think, is really, I say, the middle ground of really what you've learned, and you can actually put it in place. The next one would be incorporate. So incorporate would be really the incorporation. So for me, I always say learned behavior is key. So for example, we have so many initiatives that are great, but then they stop and all the action stops. But it's about incorporating it and taking it further. Practical steps would be, for example, having things in your policies and your appraisal, supervisions, even inductions, having things such as monthly meetings where people are able to have and speak out and maybe share points of view, future recruitment and retention plans, all of these can be brought into large or small organizations. And even large organizations have a charter, which we know happens as well. I mean, one thing I find which is really important is that a leader's behavior sets a tone of other staff behaviors. So if a leader doesn't behave in a way that demonstrates acceptance of a newcomer, then it's likely that other colleagues will do the same. So creating a culture that embraces a variety of styles and voices inside the organization, which is representative of the workforce, helps to combat and undo really bad practices, as Sonia said, like biases and discrimination. So most importantly, one thing I find, if the person leaves the organization, we don't want the initiative to stop, because that's usually happens with a lot of the things in social care. If we work with commissioners, if someone has a great idea, they really are the driver. So we don't want that person to leave the organization and everything stops. So really continuing by incorporating a plan of action in place is really key. The last point I would say is really the sharing. So we also know that sharing, as we say in care, they say sharing is caring, but it's also the way of learning good practice, and by sharing the information amongst our workforce and the sector. Now we can talk to leaders and other organizations about their experiences and really progress our knowledge. And this can help to change the mindset and really build trust and create a workplace where people feel free to express themselves. And knowledge is learned through social practices, through interactions, when individuals interact with each other, not just talking, but they're also sharing information, because through that, a person comes to know how to deal with situations, because we may not be sure how to maybe handle a situation we're embarrassed. It also allows the braver conversations to be had and share with another colleague what would happen. I'm sure various people have really gone through this pandemic of really what's happening and how it's happened. So those would be my 5 points around it. And for me, I say the goal is to cultivate a culture of belonging where we all feel safe and embraced and reflects on the people we care for. I think that's key, because we can all learn from one another's diversity, increases the overall knowledge and experiences available within a staff team, and their inclusion can obviously keep people there. And that's where the retention comes into place. So that would be my sort of 5-point of action plan. I think it's really simple. It can be sort of adhered to a small organization into a large organization, and it can move from sector to sector. So I think all these simple things are really important, along with the communication that runs with it.
Yeah, spot on. And, you know, not to insult you, Dudley, but the best ideas are always the simple ones.
Yeah.
You know, people always go, how did someone invent that? It's so obvious. And this is so obvious. And I mean, if you're a provider watching this, we're in a sort of community now, a society, an era where everyone's afraid of being culturally inappropriate or using cultures in the wrong way. And if you have got in your team, because I'm going to say it. I know I said we're going to get some big doo-doo. You're a cisgendered white person in a leadership role managing a business. You know, likelihoods are you are. And you've got people in your team who are of Black, Asian, ethnic, LGBTQIA, disability communities, and you want to go, how am I going to make this work? What am I going to do? Do not sit there and write a policy and put procedures in place to support them. Sit down and learn from them. They are the ones that will lead you in your service. So, I really need to make sure that our business is more BAME centric and more accessible for people in the BAME community and more responsive and respectful to them. I'm going to use the people within my business, within my organization. I'm going to give them the positions of equality and diversity leads for BAME, and I'm going to work with them to implement these procedures. We can't do it on our own. We have to work, and I'm going to say it on co-production. We have to work with the people. We have to take their experiences, because you will not be offensive. Questions are not offensive if you want to learn. If you want to learn and make a change, questions won't be offensive. And I think it's perfect. I absolutely love what you're advocating there, Dudley. Before I come back to you, Sonia, I just want to ask Dawn, because we're talking about equality, diversity, and we want to empower people to be able to make these changes, and we want to empower our organizations to allow people to progress. And I've been discussing today about how people aren't aware of how to transgress from senior roles to management roles to senior operational manager roles or regional manager roles. And our Dawn is someone who is just smashing down the barriers and going, I can do whatever, and I'm going to achieve whatever. Recently speaking at our IHSCM national conference, about her experiences, regional roles, SLG consultancy, whatever it is, Dawn, she can do it. But Dawn, not everyone believes you can achieve it on your own. Do you want to discuss a recent incident? Oh, we'll keep it anonymized, obviously, but when you told me, I was gutted for you.
Yeah, so I think over the last 3 to 4 weeks in the development of going freelance and being more independent and more inclusive in what I want to do, I think that I have faced several, what I tend to call them the oppositions, where I've been questioned of who has referred me in relation to, oh well, somebody somebody must have recommended you because of, no, this isn't just right. I've had somebody say that I was asked to speak at the IHSCM conference because I do the Care and View with Adam. Not off my own back, not the fact that I've worked so hard over the last 18 months, but it was more about the fact that I worked with Adam. I've been told I'm too emotional, but to me, if I was a man, I'd probably be told that I was either quite forceful. I've been told, I'm too emotional over visiting, and these visiting policies, I obviously don't have a lot of understanding in it because I'm too emotional because I'm a woman. Or when I have been quite forceful about something, probably on the same stature as somebody like Adam, I'm told I'm aggressive. So to be quite honest, the way I feel at times over the last 3 to 4 weeks, I felt like jacking it in and saying, do you know what, I'll just go back to being me and carrying on as before. But I've faced some really difficult people and some really difficult conversations in that, like Carla said, in bridging the gap of me and businesses and companies. Like, I need to know somebody or name drop somebody in order to do my job quite effectively, where in reality that isn't actually the case. And to have I've said before, somebody rang me up the other day and said about a mock inspection, and that's the show that Mark Topps does. And me. So sometimes I do feel quite discriminated against as a woman. I'm going to be honest. I don't feel it's inclusive all the time in social care whatsoever. I think there may be the majority of female workers, but I think as a woman at times you are regarded as too emotional, or if you are quite forceful, you are regarded as, oh my God, she's so aggressive. I'm not aggressive. I'm just getting my point across. I even had somebody last year when I was talking to a social worker and my nominated individual sat next to me and I'm trying to explain about this resident's health needs. Nominated individual did not know. Could I talk to Rob, please? Why? I'm the manager of the home. Well, you're getting a bit upset. No, you're just not listening. But I handed the phone over and he agreed. He didn't have this information. But I think, I have noticed it more over the last 3 to 4 weeks. I either need to know somebody in a high place, I either need to be able to name drop somebody in a high place, or I need to not be so emotional as one of the little ladies. So, it has been quite difficult to establish myself over the last 3 to 4 weeks, but I will get there slowly. And I do think it's about inclusive. It's about inclusivity. And at the end of the day, social care is supposed to be this hugely inclusive place. And when I'm talking about inclusion, it's not just in the workplace. I know, you've got to regard that between the whole sector. And at times that's just not happening. And that has disappointed me over the last few weeks. I've been quite disappointed.
But Dawn, you've achieved so much for a woman. You should be happy. And it's a phrase that people use. Oh, doesn't she look good for her age? And oh, haven't you achieved much? And it's like, well, no, let's stop the condescending tone. Can we just normalize congratulating people on achieving what they've achieved through hard work and determination? I don't want to be colorblind. I don't want to be gender blind. I think there's still a lot of work to do for us to get to a society where we are like that. But for people, there has to be this understanding that, Dawn, you have achieved what you've achieved through hard work, through graft, and through making your own path. And people shouldn't have to question that. They shouldn't have to question that. Sonia, I want to ask you something quite specific, and I don't know whether you'll be able to answer it for me or not, but it's a conversation that I do have with people, and I think it's an archaic sense within business nowadays, but it's the idea and the mentality that the majority of leaders are white because they're probably just the best person for the job. We've got to think about the best person for the job. Now, obviously, that is something we do have to consider. The argument I have, especially within, say, Hollywood and the acting world and within other areas, is if they've not been shown that platform's there and they've got the ability to do that, we've not made the avenues available for people, so we need to make those opportunities. But how can employers protect themselves from false discrimination claims when they're employing people? And is there anything that they need to consider when they do employ people around discrimination and inclusivity in the roles within their business?
I'm glad you've asked that question because it's really important and it's actually something I'm really passionate about. So sometimes we have clients come to us and they kind of go, oh, no, we don't need any help with recruitment. We're fine on that level. We just need help with contract of employment or something or other. And then you start to ask them a few questions about their recruitment process and you start kind of going, and you start pulling your hair out going, no, you can't do that. And, so actually I'm quite passionate about the fact that the Equality Act covers everybody from the point of the fact that if they apply for a job, it doesn't matter if you don't recruit them, it doesn't matter if they don't become an employee. If you haven't treated them fairly, there's a claim for discrimination there potentially. So how do we go about kind of reducing that risk for an employer? And this is where I'm talking about really operating at best practice. So some things that actually link into probably part of like Dudley's plan in terms of quick wins of how we can be ensuring that we are inclusive, ensuring we're not directly or indirectly discriminating against people. So it's things like people like us reviewing your job descriptions for you. I've seen job descriptions that are he, and she. I'm like, no. Why would you just assume that it's a male doing that job or it's a female doing that job? No. So it's still, and it still goes on. So we removing things like that, but actually what we're doing is making sure that there's no real discrimination, any form of discrimination in that job description. It's purely about competency, it's purely about skill. And then going in blind with the recruitment. So perhaps us as the HR team know the age and the gender and things like that of the applicants, but that is all removed before those applications are then going to a pool of recruitment managers. And when I say pool, I mean a diverse pool. So not all white male, not all white female, a mix of gender, race, everything. As much as we can mix it, we should mix it. But looking at where we are actually placing our adverts, are we placing them on the right jobs boards? Actually, when are we doing it? Are we doing it in the middle of a religious festival when actually half of one religion might be fasting, or they might be celebrating something that's very important to them? So are we doing that, or are we not doing? Are we placing our adverts in the right places? And I'm not just talking about Indeed and I'm talking about the right places where we're actually going to attract that skill set. So these are very simple things that we can be doing. And then also when those applications are going to those managers, we're not just kind of going, oh, pick the best ones. We're giving them some really objective scoring to go through. So we're looking at the job description that has had all the discrimination taken out of it, and we're pulling parts of that, and we're scoring these applications against our job spec and our person spec essentially. And then we do the same thing for interviews. So where I'm getting told, oh no, our recruitment's fine and our interviews are fine, they haven't got any standardized interview templates. They ask people that are coming for the same job different questions. There's no real scoring that's going on. I mean, all of this is really, really poor practice. And then what happens is if a candidate does kind of say, I feel that you might have actually discriminated against me, and we're kind of, the employer's going, no, we haven't, you just weren't the best person for the job. How are you going to prove it? How are you going to prove it that they weren't the best person for the job? So I've actually had to do that before at a tribunal. I've had to go through all of the candidates. I've had to anonymize everybody, but I've had to show that the right person got the job out of just based purely on objective scoring criteria and not for any other reason. Because if I'm able to look at the scoring and go, well, actually, these are the 10 things that we were looking for, and you've scored 0 to 1 on all of them, whereas, you know, evidence-wise, we were looking for a 3 or a 4, and this is our cutoff. Same when it comes to the interview, but potentially not just an interview. If we're getting them to do an assessment, are we giving them extra time if they've got some kind of a disability? Are we even asking them if we need to make a reasonable adjustment on account of a disability? I've had managers tell me horror stories of they've invited people to interview and it's on the 4th floor and there's no lift and someone's turned up in a wheelchair. Because they're not asking the question at the invite to interview, you know, are there any reasonable adjustments that we need to be making, etc., etc. So there's so many things that you can be doing that also, yes, they link back to a policy, because the policy is saying that this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to ensure that we are, you know, I always say aiming to be, because it's a bit like you said, Adam, once you've done it, you've almost out of date. So you've kind of got to be renewing that all of the time, but this is what we're working towards, and the policy needs to be showing that, and it's unique for every organization because their needs are unique, but it should be competency skills based. Otherwise you will end up with hefty fines at tribunals. So when we run training around this, when we're looking at best practice recruitment, when we're looking at the Equality Act, when we're training managers about not just direct discrimination, but indirect discrimination, but also things like protected characteristics. Sometimes it's by association, or sometimes it can be that I have a child that I care for who has a disability, so it's by association, or it's because somebody misjudged and thought I was a particular religion and I'm not actually that religion. I'm still covered under that protected characteristic. So it's going into that more deeper with managers and really removing that bias, that unconscious bias that we've got. But one of the opening slides that I use is, what do you think was, you know, a discrimination claim? What do you think, you know, the highest award for age discrimination was last year? And it's a little game I like to play, and everybody in the room puts their hands up, and some people think that they're going really, really high, and nobody ever gets near the figure because they're crazy figures. And then when you tell them, they kind of go, and then you say, well, if you got it wrong, that's what you might cost your organisation.
So let's play it. Let's play it. Do you know the figures now, Sonia, enough for us to play it?
Okay, so Dudley might cheat because he knows some of these already.
I'm not going to say anything.
So
Dudley's out of the game. He's out of the running.
So awards for 2019, 2020. What do you think was the maximum award for age discrimination?
Oh, it's not like a multiple choice. I'm going to say, what, 20 grand?
Okay, Adam's going with 20 grand for maximum award for age discrimination. Dawn?
Oh, I'm going to say 500,000.
Okay.
I was going to say 850,000.
£243,636. So £250,000.
Wow.
Average claim is about 40,000. That's the average claim. That's age discrimination. If we take disability, what do you think maximum on disability is?
I'm going to say 900,000.
Okay.
I'm going to say 900,001.
Don't cheat.
No, I'm going to say 120.
Okay.
I was going to say, actually, I was waiting for Mark to do that.
Mark?
What's that? I've already said mine. What did I say? 800 and something. 600 and something. I can't remember what I said.
It's £265,719. So, and again, and the average claim was about £28,000. So even if you're looking at an average claim, you're talking near enough £30,000 to £40,000. Now that is what the employee or the claimant is awarded. That's not including all your costs for your time, your manager's time, of which it is very, very stressful, but your legal team and your legal counsel as well.
No, I think it should be more. I think the fines should
Yeah.
be more, a bit like GDPR, which is why I think I was guessing so high.
So there is no cap on discrimination claims, but we do see them go up and down quite a lot. But I think they're relative to the claimant in terms of the job role, in terms of salary, in terms of the loss of income that they might have occurred, but also how badly the organisation has treated them. So, and again, I can't harp on about this enough, but if you don't follow ACAS guidelines, now ACAS isn't the law, but it's there as best practice. If you don't follow that, then you get an additional 25% on your claim. And if you're not following your own policies and procedures, again, your claim will go up, because we get a lot of people that I've had a call last week about a disciplinary, and they haven't even followed their own policy. And then they were talking to me about the plan and what they put together. And I was like, but you haven't even followed what's in your own policy. So if this went to a tribunal, they're not going to be very favourable about it, because you haven't even done the bare minimum of what you said you were going to do. And again, employment tribunal judges look very unfavourably upon that kind of behaviour. And these are just discrimination cases, so that there might be a mix of unfair dismissal that then goes on into that, or constructive dismissal claim. There's loads of things that can then come out of it. But it's important to know that somebody could be with you a week and put a claim in against you under the Equality Act, which is these claims that I'm talking about. You don't have to have the whole 2 years service. If they feel that you have discriminated against them under one of the protected characteristics, they don't need to have any service. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. And unless you start putting the figures out there, I don't think they understand how much it can cost an organisation as well.
So one question I had, as you were talking, I had a couple, so we spoke about, and Dudley's mentioned it as well, about unconscious bias. What would your advice be about, either of you, about how managers or leaders or team leaders could go about trying to change cultures and remove unconscious bias?
I mean, for me, going back to what Sonia said, I think a lot of people used to say it's how you finish the race, but I think here the most important thing for everyone is how you start, and making your organization really ready from when you come in the door. As Sonia said, just from people applying to a service, it's really looking at how you go about it. But I think, without making sort of like that big sort of scary figure that we can all see, Sonia said, I think it's trying to normalize us so we're actually humanize our practices that we're in. So when someone does come in, they're able to sort of communicate. One thing I always ask about is maybe putting in a diversity champion or inclusion champion, someone that almost sits between the actual management and the staff. It's almost like a go-between. So they're actually almost like a rep that the staff can speak to and share that information to the actual management. So that sort of gap that you have is bridged, and it's really trying to make a workplace a place where people can actually express themselves. Because, as you said, things change, someone comes in and everyone's not sure if they're saying the right thing or not, but really trying to lay a place where you can actually have that. There's things such as surveys you can have in your organization which are anonymous, where people can actually write down their thoughts and feelings, and that can be shared with the management.
Forums are really good.
Yeah.
I think we've mentioned them earlier, but employee networks and forums are really, really good.
Yeah.
Just so that people feel that they can come together and talk. Now, if you feel that you're a smaller organisation, you might want to buddy up with a couple of different organisations and take on board kind of potentially some themes that are coming out of that. But Dudley's talked about that, and I think Dawn and Adam might have mentioned it earlier, but employee networks and forums are really, really important. But the other thing I would mention about the unconscious bias is training. So not just training your managers, but training everyone. Because if you have got a lot of unconscious bias, and let's be honest, we all have got unconscious bias, if we are getting into he said, she said scenarios in the workplace, and I see a lot of them, they end up in disciplinaries or they end up in grievances, which take up a lot of time of the organisation, and can become quite risky. But actually, if people were just trained and more aware about how to behave with dignity and respect, and also know what the expectations from an organisation are, because culture is really important. So there's actually case law around culture in an organisation. So effectively, if you set your bar about here and everybody kind of operates about here, anything that happens above here, we know that we're going to deal with that in some way, whether it's misconduct or gross misconduct or some kind of a disciplinary. But if you've got your bar up here and everyone's just free for all, when something comes to your attention, you can't just pick on that one and then go, I think we want to do something about that. There's actually cases where employment tribunal judges have ruled that actually the culture of the organisation has allowed that in the past. So why all of a sudden was it now an issue? There's a very funny case, actually. I won't talk about it now, but it's probably not past the right time to be talking about this case. But it was at tribunal, and it was very specifically about culture. But going back to bias, there's when we do training, there's lots of different kind of bias. So there's an affinity bias where it's that person's like me, that person looks like me, that person talks like me. There's halo of horns effect. So someone walks in the room or you meet somebody, even virtually, and within the first kind of like 7 to 9 seconds, you've made a decision about if you like that person or not. And then the rest of the conversation, your mind is then basically looking for reasons to back up that judgment. So kind of just thinking, oh, I really like Dudley's top, so I've gone with the halo effect there. And then the rest of the conversation is just, and people do it in interviews a lot, they do it in appraisals, they do it in probation reviews, and they don't realise. So looking at how those biases affect us, and then effectively how can we remove it so we are just very objective when we are giving feedback to staff, when we are doing appraisals, all this kind of stuff, so important.
Thank you very much. And the other question I had, which you spoke about, Sonia, was around disability inclusion questions prior to interview. Now, I see this quite a lot on kind of the manager networks, on social media, about, you know, when you invite somebody to an interview, what you can and what you can't offer from an HR perspective. So I've quite often seen debates about, oh, you can send people the questions in advance. No, you definitely can't do that. What's your advice there? Obviously, you've already given us one around making sure that people, you know, can access the building, that kind of thing. Any other top tips that you can kind of share with us?
Consistency. So if you are going to, you know, let's say you're inviting them in to do a presentation, and you're going to give one person the presentation 7 days beforehand. Everybody has to have that presentation 7 days beforehand. So if you're inviting somebody in on a Monday and a Tuesday and a Wednesday, I always say to the team, we've got to make sure that we're logging so that they're having the exact same amount of time to have a look at that presentation brief, but asking the question about if they've got a disability, or if they require any reasonable adjustments on account of a disability, because they might need a bit longer to look at that presentation brief. So for example, typically people with dyslexia normally have up to 25% more time. So I've done like qualifications in psychometric testing, and we would always know who needed extra time, and we would speak to them and we would make sure that they had that extra time to do those psychometric tests, whether that be online, in person, during an assessment centre. So really it's about making sure that you are asking the right questions, but also sometimes what we find is, Dawn, you can probably relate to this, they will ask a male candidate different questions to what they ask a female candidate. So female candidate, I've heard them say that they've asked things like, how many children have you got, and you know, how are you going to kind of ensure your childcare arrangements if we need to call you into work?
I was asked how many children I had and what my husband did for a job.
Yes.
And when I asked why, they said, well, we just wanted to make sure that your husband's job wasn't going to impact on yours. I said, why would it impact on mine?
Exactly.
Well, in case you've got to pick the kids up from school, or if something else.
Yeah, so we've seen this quite a lot, but also things like so have you got any caring responsibilities or assumptions that are made. So basically there are ways to ask a question, but you can't just ask a female that and not the male. So I say to them, first of all, why do you need to know that information? What's important? So actually we need to know if they can be flexible. Perfect example, when we've got CQC coming in, we need all hands on deck, and it goes a little bit crazy. I know from personal experience it goes mad. So we've got to get ready for that. So actually, well, why don't we just ask a question about flexibility to everybody? So, you know, this is how our service runs. We are operating 24/7, this, that, and the other. There are times in the business where sometimes unforeseen, you know, sickness, COVID, CQC, whatever it might be, you know, are you able to accommodate that degree of flexibility? And we're asking everyone the same question. We're still finding out some kind of information, and actually there we're noting it. So if somebody's saying I can be flexible, that's fine by me, and then later on in the employment relationship they're saying I can't be flexible, I never knew about that, actually we can go back to the interview notes. So thinking about the kind of question, well, what you want to know, and asking it in the right way, and asking it of everybody. But there are some questions that you just should not ask, like, you know, are you married? Oh, okay, you've just got married, so are you planning on having a family? Again, I've been asked those questions before, and it's not fair because they wouldn't ask a male candidate that. So I think it's about being consistent, being fair, being objective, coming to somebody like us and saying, this is what we'd like to ask, but we're a bit worried about how to ask it. We'll word it for you in the right way, or we'll tell you you just shouldn't be asking that question, or even why do you need to know?
And can I just suggest to people out there, because I have been subjected to this many, many times. Oh, so what's your girlfriend's name? He's called Stephen. So I just, he's called Stephen. Can we not just assume that everyone is in heterosexual cisgendered relationships? And can we normalize asking people what their pronouns are? I have started many a meeting by going, my name is Adam Pennell. I go by he, him. If I'm in the mood, I go by he, they. It all depends on how I'm feeling at that moment in time. But those are my pronouns. Please feel free to share what your pronouns are, and they will be respected, because we do not want to misgender people. Yes, it sounds like a woke trope, but it's something we should be asking people now. We need to be accustomed to this. But before, I know we're running out of time, and I want this to go on forever because this show is great. Something you were saying before, Sonia, about that's my other half sign in the kitchen. Something you were saying before about dyslexia, and we need to have a short mention for accessible information standards as well. Because if we're not providing people the information in the format that they need, then how can they say that I've been fully informed?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if you've seen it recently, but on our kind of computers and everything have updated, and now there's an accessibility thing that pops up sometimes in my emails, to kind of say, oh, this doesn't look as you could do a bit of work on making this email more accessible. And actually we've seen it in policies and procedures. So front covers, or where we're doing version controls, we're looking at ways of how we can make that more accessible for staff members. But sometimes, like Dudley was saying, when you just talking to the staff and asking them, how can we make it more accessible for you? Do you understand this information? Do you need any help with it? I think it's very, very important to ask that question of an individual, because it's easy to just kind of assume that everyone with dyslexia needs this, or everyone needs this, but actually it's very individual and very unique. So somebody might need something printed on yellow paper, and somebody might need a green overlay. I'm talking about dyslexia in particular. But there are other things, so sensory processing disorder, where people are certain lights or certain smells, all sorts of things that we need to be better at, and particularly in this sector we're not that good at, in all honesty.
I mean, Dudley, your 5 steps lead to that perfectly, don't they? Awareness about how people access their information, educate on the alternative ways that you can do it, action, put it into place, incorporate, make it culture within your setting, and then share.
Yeah. I think it's wonderful that we can have something so simple, because I think so many people complicate so many of these things. And I think when people come through the door, I mean, if they're given a big sort of like file to read through and saying, this is our policy on how to be inclusive. Well, you know what happens with a lot of those files as well. So I think actually having the practical side things in place, and I think we all probably could share some practical steps and tips throughout organizations. One thing that we actually employed was putting Independence Days for employees. So therefore people would celebrate Independence Days and they'll be able to know about someone's culture and background. It was really simple. And what was really thinking, we all love probably most people, is the food side of things and bringing dishes, cultural dishes that people can share, whether you like it or not, you know, and getting the recipe. And that's worked wonders in some of the sort of settings and providers I've sort of actually been and spoken to. So actually having things in place which people can actually use to break sort of the ice or share cultural sort of differences, if they still want to call them, is really important. So I think that as well is the other side of the people who are doom and gloom thinking, oh, we're going to be paying out 200 odd. So I think really make it easier for yourselves, you know, really share, ask people their name, their culture, their background. And I think that's a sort of landing place where we can be more open, which we know we can.
Spot on. Absolutely spot on. I couldn't say it better myself. And I literally could sit here and talk about this all night. However, Dawn, I believe you will agree with me when I say this, that this is a conversation that needs to continue, but we need to look at it from a different angle, and we need to be looking at it at those we support, and the equality and diversity from those angles as well. We've got David Sheard coming up soon, which will be a great, you know, topic conversation to have with him. But I was just thinking what you were saying then, Dudley, about food and food cultures, because I'm one of these people who salivate on TikTok constantly because people are eating fufu and all these different foods that just look absolutely amazing. And, you know, they eat with their fingers because that's their culture. And then, yes, you get, you know, the idiots in society going, gross, but you've not washed your hands. And it's like, well, no, actually, that's their culture and that's what they do. But when we move into things like dementia and people who will revert back to the appropriate way of eating and using their fingers and their food, we need to be aware about that. So we need to educate ourselves on the equality in that angle. I'm going to be quiet because Dawn and Mark will kick me off the show if I carry on talking tonight. Because I love this. I'm so passionate about equality and diversity, and to have two guests who are just such great champions on the topic as well. Thank you. Right, Dawn, I'm quiet. You've got it now.
Well, I just thank you so much to both Dudley and Sonia for coming on again. Thank you so much. It's been amazing. I've learned quite a bit tonight, although I have had a message from somebody who applied for a job with the NHS last week who has asked me to let you know, Sonia, they asked the ethnic minority, they asked a sexual preference and all sorts of other questions on their application forms on NHS jobs. So she just asked me to let you know.
I think they use it for monitoring purposes again. They I don't think you have to fill in that information, but a lot of employers do ask for it so they can monitor it, and that's what I was talking about earlier, is look at your stats.
Yeah. So she just texted and said, could you let Sonia know? So next week we have the amazing Dysphagia Kitchen back with their head chef Gary doing a bit of live Christmas cooking. So
gonna have our own Gino Di Campo next week, aren't we? It's gonna be something fun. Well, we'll have to sit here with our glasses of wine and just go back to the kitchen, and we'll go back to Gary.
So yeah, he's going to be tempting us with all sorts of recipes, not only for those who follow an IDSI diet, but those in care homes. And Sandra is going to be discussing in respect of the new champion course they're doing, and in respect of nutrition and hydration, hopefully with a bit of a Christmas twist to it. So yes, very exciting.
And obviously we can't forget to go bright and early tomorrow morning to open our Advent calendars, because it is the start of Advent tomorrow. I want to get back into the equality diversity conversation. If you're a business and you're celebrating Christmas and you push Christmas every single year, but you have people in your business who have different religious holidays, celebrate them as well. Let's celebrate all holidays. Let's respect all holidays. But it is Advent tomorrow. And I also have to give a huge shout out because it is World Awareness for AIDS Day tomorrow as well. So if you have got a red ribbon and you support it, Terence Higgins Trust, brilliant people, pop that red ribbon on your lapel. But yes, our Advent calendar will be open tomorrow. Dawn's wonderful initiative for the Caring View. So please do check our Twitters and our LinkedIn's. We're up early opening our Advent calendars. So 8 o'clock in the morning. and you will see who our first Christmas care hero is. So, thank you so much, everyone. And no doubt, Sonia, you will be back on again. You know, we'll include you on the payroll. We don't get paid, so you won't get anything, but we'll put you on it if you want.
Medal. I just want that gold medal. I'm coming back on the next time. No, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. I really enjoy it. Thank you.
And Dudley, yeah, honestly, I'm sure we will get you back on when we discuss equality, diversity again in the future, and anything else that you might find of interest, because Dudley's a man of many talents. He's got many hats that he wears. Very, very clever person, and I've only known you a few months properly, and I've already learned a wealth of knowledge from you. So no doubt we will have you back on again in some capacity. So thank you very much, everyone.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
See you later.
Thank you again for joining us tonight on The Caring View. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and whilst you're here, check out some of the other videos that we've got up online. If you've got something that you think may be interesting for us to discuss, or if you want to guest spot with us, then drop us an email to thecaringview@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter, find us on Facebook. All the information is down there in the description box. But until then, have a good evening, stay safe,